Good morning, class. I'm just going to do a quick review of our different techniques so that you'll be able to do your assignment for this week. So remember, with blending, you're going to load up your brush with a lot of paint, quite a bit of water, so it's dark and wet. So you lay the paint down, get a lot of dark wet paint on your paper. Then you rinse your brush, get some of the water off and the paint off, and then you're rinsing and drying it. Then you place clear water down here, and you back brush and invite the paint down. Then I'm going to rinse again and get the water off, dry it. Start down a little farther and invite it down until it's smoothly blended and we have a subtle gradient there. Okay, so that's back brushing. That's blending, rather. And you're going to use this when you want to go from dark to light in a subtle way. Alright, my next instruction is on glazing, and glazing is really just a fancy word for layering. And you can do this a little bit with oil paints, but it's mostly with watercolors. This is when you're putting wet paint on a dry piece of paper, and it takes longer than if you are going to just use wet all over the place and just charge your colors, which means you just keep adding wet on wet. This is waiting for it to dry, so I'm going to draw that triangle, that rectangle that we did in class yesterday. I'm going to paint that rectangle, and it's a pretty solid block of color. Then we're going to wait for it to dry. And your paper is better than this paper that I'm doing it on. Your paper is thicker and it also has some texture to it. So I'm going to wait for that to dry. 2 blocks of color, so you can do that too. You can work right along with me. Pause the video so that you can do what you need to do on your paper. So I'm going to make 2 very long triangles. Wow, this paper is really wrinkling up, isn't it, with this water? Interesting. So I did a block of yellow, and then I'm going to do a block of blue, and that's kind of where we ended class yesterday. We'll use this when we are practicing our subtle color changes and mixing. Meanwhile, we're waiting for the red block to dry. Okay, so the fun thing about watercolor is that once you get that block, the water and the paint is going to want to stay in that block. It's not going to want to travel unless you wet the paper over here, but it's going to want to stay with the other water molecules on here. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to worry about it traveling outside. So I'm going to wet my brush again, get some of the water off. I'm going to go back into the red and paint another thin layer over here, and I'm only going to do it on half so that you can see the color change. So the more layers that you put on, the darker it will become. I'm going to wait for that to dry again, and I'm going to do one more block over here because I want you to see. I think Drew was the one that asked if you could blend 2 colors. So I'm going to remind you, complementary colors are the opposite color on the color wheel. So if you layer with an opposite color, it's just going to make the first color more dull. So if you feel like it's too bright and you really wanted a more subtle red, you can go over it with some green, which is the complementary color of red, and it just makes it a little darker and a little more duller of a red. So that's one thing you can try. Alright, the last thing I want you to try is, I can't help myself, I'm gonna go in here and blend this a little darker. So now it's gonna blend from green to red, which could be a nice shadow. Like in your painting, when you want to make a shadow in the red, you can use green instead of black is what we would typically make it darker with, but you can use the complementary color to make it better. Okay, now with these, all I want you to do is try to mix colors and see what happens when you mix colors. So I'm just going to take every color here on my palette and I'm going to put one stripe down. And next week in class, I'd like you to show me that you did this. So I'm going to do one stripe and I'm going to start outside the boxes, show the pure color, and then what happens when it goes over the orange, and then back to the pure color, just so that you can have a reference of if you chose to use two colors on top of each other, this is what it would look like. So pure red and then red over yellow. So the fun thing about watercolors, just like when we used pastels, is that you can layer colors and it really deepens the colors, because you see remnants of other colors underneath. And it shows light, just like Vermeer showed light. Watercolors are very luminous because they're kind of transparent and you can see underneath. So this is what I want you to do, just on your cheap paper, I guess. Should have given you more good paper. Take each color and just see what happens when it crosses through another color. Now I'll try black. So that gives you a little bit of a reference of what happens if you would have a base layer of yellow and then put another color on top. And I just want you to do a lot of practicing with this, with different colors on top of each other, even with these. Here's green, so you know, you get the point. It's a little bit better when it's more dry. So even blue on top of blue, how that changes. Make sure you have your towel next to you. The less water on your brush, the more deep your color will be. So it's not diluted by the water. Okay, you get the point. The more practicing you do with this, the more variety you can have in your toolbox to do with your painting. So if I wanted to, so this is layering, and then the control of values, of course, is how you use layering to control the values. You're always going to add value. With watercolor, you can't take away value. You can't make it lighter. you're going to always work from light to dark. So you have the base layer, then you're going to layer more and more layers on, and it becomes darker. So you can do that gradually. You can do it with a sharp line in between. You can do it with complementary colors that are going to change the intensity of your color. So I'm going to just go in with a red and see if I can just blend it this way. So you can use subtle color changes to add a shadow or a value. So if you're going to do skin tone, or like a neck, you're going to want it to have a highlight and then go darker. So if you wanted it to be red, you could do that. Or if you want it to get even darker, you could choose that opposite color and go back in with layering. Now I didn't wait for it to dry, so it's not going to be as good because now it's mixing. It's not creating that nice blend, so I need to wait for it to dry and be a little more patient. Okay, so you see that nice gradient there? In a minute I'll come back in and smooth out that line. Alright, with watercolor, like if you want to make a skin tone, I suggest putting a bunch of white on your somewhere on your palette. Depending on what kind of skin tone, and add a little bit of orange. You can make a couple of different skin tones. That white is not wanting to lift. So then you're going to move to your girl with the pearl earring, and you can start in. I'm going to want to try to see what that color is on a different piece of paper, and then begin going. Now I can color this whole thing with a base layer, and then I can come in and do another layer in the parts that I want shadows or that I want darker. Okay, but remember, you can very seldomly go lighter with watercolor, so you always want to start with a nice light base layer, and then you can always go back in and make it darker. Okay, and then you're gonna use my slideshow for a reference on what colors are here. Remember, that's that nice cadmium blue for the scarf and her shirt. So this is a practice for you to get in here and use some layering and get some darker areas, and maybe even just some lines. Go over these lines with a nice dark concentrated color, but first do your base layer. Okay, don't worry about making the background that solid black that Vermeer used, because that will just be wasting paint. Okay, and then you have a plain piece of paper in your packet, and with this plain piece of paper, this fresh new canvas, I'd like you to choose the bumpier side, draw a still life or a portrait, anything you want. You can even do a landscape if you want. A still life, remember, is like anything that you set up that's inanimate, like some vases or some a glass or any of your favorite things at home, and then draw it and then paint it. Okay, so this is a free choice. You can draw whatever you want and then paint it with watercolor using these different methods. Okay, have fun.